Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I started jogging at night about a year ago. I switched to nighttime jogs, because there's less car and bike traffic to deal with, plus it's usually cooler at night. I'm not a fan of running in the heat of the day. Usually, I stick to the well-lit streets around my neighborhood, but one night, I decided to explore a new route through a less familiar part of town. It was a beautiful night, and I had just finished my regular 5 miles. I felt good, so I kept going. I headed into an area with fewer streetlights, and the streets were deserted. Only the occasional car passed by, and the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement was the only noise. I rounded a corner onto a street I had never been down before. The houses were older, and the yards were not as well maintained. I figured I'd just make a loop through the neighborhood and then head back home. A few blocks in, I noticed a man walking ahead of me on the other side of the street. A short time later, I realized he had crossed over to my side of the street and was now jogging behind me. I thought this was odd, as he had been walking before, but now he was running the same route I was, seemingly following me. He was moving steadily, matching my speed, and every time I picked up the pace, he did too. It was subtle, but it made me uncomfortable. To see what would happen, I slowed down, and when I did, he did as well. I quickened my steps, and again, he matched me. He was far enough behind me that I couldn't see his face clearly whenever I glanced back, but he was wearing dark clothes, and his movements were steady and deliberate. I tried to rationalize that it might be a coincidence, but I still felt uneasy. I approached a better lit street, hoping to feel a little safer. I glanced back and saw that the man had turned onto the street behind me. He was still following at a distance, but unmistakably following me. Not wanting to confront him or make it obvious that I was scared, I decided to lose him before heading back home. I turned toward a more populated area, hoping to lose him in the crowd. I took a few more turns, running faster than usual. Each time I looked back, the man was still there, moving through the shadows, as if determined to stay out of the streetlights, making it harder for me to get a good look at him. Finally, I saw a group of people gathered outside a bar, chatting and laughing, so I went toward them. As I approached, I took one last look behind me. The man had stopped at the edge of the lighted area, just standing there watching. I sprinted the rest of the way to the bar, trying to catch my breath. Looking back, I saw the man turn and walk away, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed at the bar for a while, even grabbing some water to pass the time, just in case. When I finally felt like enough time had passed, I jogged back home, sticking to well-lit streets and staying close to houses. I didn't see the man for the rest of my jog, and after that night, I stuck to areas that I knew well and where I usually jogged. I've been jogging through my neighborhood for years, mostly sticking to familiar routes. One quiet evening, just cool enough to make running pleasant, I ended up taking a route I ran often. It was along a street where the houses were old and the streetlights were spaced far apart. On this route, there was one house that had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. The yard was overgrown, the paint on the house was peeling, and the windows were boarded up. I once asked my parents why it had been left empty for so long, and they told me someone had died tragically inside, and nobody wanted to buy it, so it just sat there, rotting. That night, as I ran past the abandoned house, I noticed something strange. The front door, which had always been securely boarded up, was slightly open. The boards were still there, but they looked loose, as if someone had forced their way in. I slowed down, trying to see if anything else was out of place, and noticed a faint light flickering inside. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the streetlights or maybe a reflection, but the light was too consistent. It looked like a candle or a small lamp, and it was moving, bouncing up and down as if someone were walking with it. I stopped running and cautiously approached the house, peering through the gap in the door. I could see shadows moving around inside. It was difficult to make out any details, but the movement was unmistakable. There were at least two figures moving around. It could easily have been a group of kids who felt brave and wanted to explore an abandoned building. I was about to continue my run, but something was drawing me in, so I stayed. At first, I thought maybe it was just kids, but then I caught the heavy smell of cigar smoke, and I questioned why someone exploring wouldn't just use a flashlight instead of candles. The shadows were more distant now, as more candles had been lit, allowing me to see better inside. There were plenty of shadows, revealing that it was a group of people, but all I could make out clearly was a figure sitting in a chair. This person was making lots of hand gestures and seemed to be talking passionately about something. I could hear muffled voices, but they were too quiet to understand. Just then, one of the boards on the front door, which I'd been leaning on, snapped a little, making a sharp popping noise. The figure in the chair went silent and turned toward the door, quickly moving and blowing out the candles. I had revealed myself with the snapping wood, and I wasn't about to wait around to see what happened next. A rush of fear washed over me, and I took off running. I didn't stop until I reached the street my house was on. When I got home, I thought about calling the police, but I wasn't even sure what to tell them. I wasn't certain of what I'd seen. The next day, on my way to work, I drove past the abandoned house again. The front door was closed, and the boards were secured across it again with no sign of any activity inside. Now, every time I jog down that street, I glance over at the abandoned house, curious to see if there's any sign of movement, but I haven't seen anything else since that night. When I decided to take a weekend vacation at a rural Airbnb, I was hoping for some peace and quiet. The listing had promised beautiful scenery and a cozy place to stay on a working farm. I'm not one for the farm life, but the idea of waking up to birdsong and breathing in some fresh air sounded perfect. On the second morning of my stay, I woke up early. I'd been trying to get back into a jogging routine, so I thought this would be the perfect place to start. I got dressed, laced up my sneakers, and headed out the front door. The farmhouse was surrounded by a large, open field with a few scattered barns. I started jogging along a dirt path that wound around the edge of the property. It was peaceful, and I found myself settling into a comfortable rhythm. After about a mile, I noticed a small, overgrown path leading off into the woods. I hadn't planned on going that way, but something about it piqued my curiosity. I decided to see where it led and turned off the main path to follow the narrower trail. It was much less maintained, with branches reaching out and the ground uneven beneath my feet. The path led me deeper into the woods, and soon I could no longer see the farmhouse or the fields. I was still enjoying the jog until I came upon a clearing. At first, it looked like just another open space in the woods, but then I saw something in the middle of the clearing, an old, broken-down structure. It looked like a shed or a small cabin, partially collapsed and covered in thick vines. The door hung loosely on its hinges, and the windows were either boarded up or shattered. I slowed to a walk and approached the building, peering through one of the broken windows. Inside, I saw a dusty interior with old furniture covered in cobwebs. A rusted metal shelf held what looked like old jars and cans, but nothing really caught my eye. I decided to take a few pictures with my phone, thinking I'd ask the Airbnb host about the building later, just out of curiosity. When I mentioned the strange structure to the host later that day, their reaction was immediate and unsettling. They went pale and said, "Oh, you found that place. You shouldn't go near it." When I asked why, they avoided eye contact and simply said it wasn't safe and had been abandoned for years. That evening, as I reviewed the photos on my phone, I noticed something disturbing in one of the pictures. In the image of the inside of the building, there was a figure, just a shadowy outline, standing in the corner of the room. I stared at it, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a result of the poor photo quality, but the figure looked too defined to be a mere glitch. The following Monday, after returning from my weekend trip, I couldn't stop thinking about the building and my photos. When I got home from work, I did a quick search online to see if I could find any information on the property. To my surprise, I came across an old news article from decades ago. It was about a family who had lived on the farm but had mysteriously disappeared. There were no leads or explanations, just an empty farmhouse and an investigation that had gone cold. Chills ran down my spine as I read the article, realizing what I had unknowingly stumbled upon during my jog. I like going on jogs to stay in shape, and even when I'm on vacation, I usually find a way to get a run in. I stayed at my cabin for a few days one weekend in September. The cabin was situated on a dirt road winding through a dense forest. It's peaceful there, which is exactly what I was looking for. The sun was setting as I set out for my jog, and the light was starting to fade. I was used to running on these roads, so the dimming light didn't bother me. As I ran, the road became darker, and the trees seemed to close in around me. I kept my pace steady, trying to clear my mind. There's something about running alone in the woods that makes you acutely aware of your surroundings. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig makes you wonder if an animal is out there. Halfway through my run, an old pickup truck passed me, going the other way. Normally, I didn't see any cars out there, but there were other cabins nearby. I never really tried to get to know any of the other cabin owners, but I figured they were normal enough people. I finished the loop, and as I turned up the driveway towards my cabin, the same old pickup truck drove past me again, and the man inside gave me a friendly wave. I didn't think much of it at the time. By the time I got back to the cabin, it was dark. I let myself in, went through my usual routine of showering and preparing dinner, and then settled down on the couch with a book. Later that night, close to 10 p.m., when it was fully dark, I heard the sound of a car engine far off. It sounded closer than it should have, like it was coming up my driveway. Then I heard heavy footsteps on the porch and the unmistakable sound of someone trying to turn the doorknob. My heart started pounding in my chest. I called the police, but since my cabin was in the middle of nowhere, they told me it would be a while before they could get there. I knew I'd have to protect myself if it came to that, so I grabbed a heavy flashlight and a broom. Not exactly ideal weapons, but it was all I had. Whoever was outside began pounding on the door, like they were really trying to force their way in. After a while, the banging stopped, and I could hear the intruder's footsteps moving quickly, circling the cabin, likely looking for another entrance. Thankfully, all the windows were on the second level and out of reach, unless they had a ladder. Eventually, I heard a car engine start, and the intruder drove away. When the police arrived, I didn't have much to tell them, just that I'd noticed the man in the old pickup truck earlier while I was jogging, and he had driven by me twice. The officer mentioned that he had passed a truck matching that description on his way to the cabin and might have captured the license plate on camera. Nothing eventful happened the rest of the nights I stayed at the cabin, and I never heard back from the police department. I guess they didn't catch the plate, or maybe it wasn't worth investigating since it was just a hunch about the truck. But that night made me think twice about running those isolated roads alone. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.